Hey, good morning everybody. It's Clint here with CCUA. Got another VEG Out video for you. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about compost. Now, I know we've had a couple compost videos before. We had one video where we examined compost to look at what was in it and what that looked like. And then we had another one where we actually made a very small sample of compost. But today I want to talk about compost on a little bit bigger of a scale. So right behind us you can actually see the remnants of some former compost piles, just overgrown with plants right now, showing as a good sign that we were making some good compost. But there's really, at least as far as the home composter is concerned, there's going to be about two main ways that folks are going to compost at home. Either in a small open air pile, or in something like a compost tumbler, which are getting more and more common. Now me personally, I'm a bigger fan of the open pile. I think you get a little bit more ground contact, a little bit more water and air and aeration in there naturally. But regardless of which method you decide to do,
sorry.
It's okay. Some technical bug difficulties. So regardless of which method somebody does, the ingredients are going to be about the same. So what makes good compost? One, size. If it's too small, you're just not going to get that heat that you need. If it's too big, then your middle is not going to get any air to it. And then you want a mixture of greens and browns. So greens, like we've talked about, are things with a lot of nitrogen, a lot of moisture. That'd be things like food scraps, fresh lawn clippings, that sort of stuff. And browns are things that are high in carbon, things that are drier. That would be dead dried leaves, straw, sawdust, horse bedding, horse manure, that sort of stuff. And you want to mix them up. And you want a bit more browns than you do greens, just to get that right balance. And so here's a few more. Tea bags and coffee grounds are all greens. Other browns would be cardboard, it's another big one, or shredded paper and newsprint. Now there's a few things that you never want to add to your compost. Lots of grease or oil or fat. Doesn't really work out well in compost. It can cause it to stink really bad. Pet waste, so your dog droppings, kitty litter, that sort of stuff we don't want in there. And then of course inorganic materials like plastic, styrofoam, metal, glass, things that are not going to break down and will just sit in there. And in the case of metal and glass, can actually be dangerous when you're working with it later. So in this picture, and this is a pretty common method, is to use a sort of lasagna style. So you're making layers of stuff. So on the bottom, making a nice dry layer, and then layering that with more greens, and more browns, and more greens, browns, greens, browns. It's kind of a big lasagna. And some people like to get kind of creative with how they layer it. So maybe the bottom layer will be sticks, and then maybe some fresh leaves, and then dry leaves, and grass clippings, and then maybe some straw, and then food waste, and then some more stuff on top. Me, I kind of just, I do a layer system, but it's a bit more informal. So I'll fill up my compost bucket, toss that on the pile, and then add browns over it. And so I always try to keep a cap on the top, because if you have just your greens, your food waste and stuff sitting on top, it's going to start to smell kind of bad. It's going to look gross. But you just cover that up with a nice layer of browns, then you are good to go. Now, in that open pile, kind of lasagna layered system, Eventually you're going to want to turn it because it's going to compost as much as it can in the form that it's in. Then you got to mix it all up, and that way it kind of redistributes a lot of that stuff. It'll actually compost even further. Now it will compost completely if you just let it sit forever. It's just going to take a lot longer. It might take as long as a year as opposed to as little as a few months. But I wanted to also talk a little bit about this sort of tumbler. I've been seeing more and more of these lately. So it's really a very similar system. The only difference is that instead of it being on the ground, it's just inside of this. So it's got, usually they have a latch that lets you open them up. And I'm not actually going to open that all the way right now because who knows what's in there right now. But this panel would open up, see the hinges down here, then you can fill that with whatever it is you have, your food waste, your lawn waste. And then the only difference between this and an open air pile is with this, it is not naturally going to get any water or ground contact. And that ground contact is important because that's where a lot of your decomposers are going to get into the compost system. Your worms, your roly-polies, flies and their larvae, all those macroinvertebrates. But also the stuff that we don't think of all the time as decomposers, mushrooms and fungi, other fungi and bacteria. And so one thing that you can do is actually take a shovelful or two of finished compost and toss it in there, and that will sort of inoculate the system with all those good bacteria that they need. And then once you have that, it's actually a lot easier to keep this one aerated because all you have to do is just give it a few spins, and then it just kind of works it all up. So it's a lot easier to turn. It is a much smaller space. You can't make quite as much, but depending on your living situation, maybe you don't need a lot of space for a compost system or have a lot of space for a compost system, and this could be a good solution for you. Well, that's about all we've got today. I just kind of wanted to go over these two basic composting systems and sort of what's involved, a little bit of the pros and cons of each of them. So if you've got any questions or comments, go ahead and just leave a comment or message us. We'd love to help you out with any of your gardening needs. Have a good day, everybody.